Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Excuse me, clearing my throat. Here we are on Good Friday. This book is in absolute tatters. Reading another bit from English Journey by J.B. Priestley, and I shall commence that very shortly. Just bring you an update on my back, which is a lot better today. I have actually been out and filmed 2 videos. Yes, one of those will be coming up this afternoon. The other one will be first thing tomorrow morning. And then tomorrow I intend to get out and film another 2 videos, God knows where, but we'll try our best and get back into the spirit of it all. Anyway, I hope you are all tucking into lots of chocolate. I suppose my audience probably not tucking into chocolate, not at this time. Anyway, good morning to Philip Hammond. Good morning to Andy Stacey. Good morning to Sarah. Thank you very much for coming by. Very pleased. Morning, Deborah Warren. How are you? Very pleased to have got over the 10,000 subscribers threshold, which happened yesterday. I feel there should be fanfares and something. I feel like, YouTube should be knocking on my door, presenting me a medal or something. But I really think nothing really changes. You just like, well done. Keep going. Okay, I will. So that's what we're doing. Keeping going. So I shall do another reading this morning. Thoroughly enjoying this book. Morning, Fiona. Thoroughly enjoying the book. Yesterday was a bad day in terms of my back, and I was suffering quite a bit. And in trying to give myself something to do, and I couldn't go out and do any filming. Good morning, Audrey. I was trying to read. I was trying to keep my back mobile and not sit down for too long, although I did end up sitting down. Morning, Lisa. Don't know if I'll be making it through tonight's reading. I have a feeling that you might read me to sleep, so don't be insulted if I drop off. Oh, I'm sure you need the sleep. I got up at 4 o'clock this morning. I couldn't sleep. Got up, did my upload to Facebook, answered a few of the comments. Then I went back to sleep again, and then I got up at 7 and rushed out. Morning, Wendy. I hope you're all well on this splendid Good Friday. The Greater Billy, congratulations on 10,000 subscribers. Thank you very much. That's very kind. It's funny because, I just do this now. I don't even think about it. I do think about it, clearly. But what I mean is, in the early days, it was that whole feeling of, oh my God, I've got to go and make a video. What the hell am I going to make a video about? And somehow, you just realise there's lots of things that it's not so much making a video, it's just having a conversation really with the audience, and you happen to be in a place of interest. I think that's really good. On another note, hooray for 10,000. I'm so thrilled for you. Thank you so much, Lisa. I know you've been on my side for some considerable time, so thank you very much. That's absolutely marvellous. Yeah, so yesterday, whilst I was sort of trying to deal with all of this, I was looking around. I could have sat and read more of this, but actually I'm enjoying it unfolding as I read it to you. So I deliberately thought, well, okay, I'm not going to read it now. I'm going to just try to see if I can read it blind and enjoy it as it unfolds and discuss those little bits. I think this is quite nice, that sort of stopping and saying, well, what does that mean? And what do you think about that? I think that engages the audience, which is what this should be about, a live stream. But I found on my shelf that I'd bought some time ago, forgot, a book by W.H. Hudson, A Shepherd's Life, who is also buried in Broadwater and Worthing Cemetery, not too far from Richard Jefferies, who I have a book of his here. And I think Jefferies inspired Hudson to become a naturalist or write. And so I was reading a little bit of Hudson yesterday. And I thought, well, either of those would make great candidates to read on this if I keep going. I also ordered another couple of books by J.B. Priestley, spending the money. don't you know? But yes. Anyway, this isn't getting the reading done. So let me just move my mouse because it's hovering over end the stream and we don't want it to end abruptly. So we were in the Potteries the last time we were there with J.B. Priestley, and he wasn't terribly what's the word? It wasn't terribly nice. That's not the right word I was looking for, but I couldn't think of it. Complimentary. He wasn't terribly complimentary about the pottery. I mean, he's not been terribly complimentary about anything, really, which is what makes him so laughable and so lovable in a way. Is sort of this, but it is 1933, and it's interesting. They're in the Depression and trying to get out of it. Is Julia here tonight morning? I don't think she is. I'm not sure. I've sent her a text this morning, as I often do, saying, "Good morning, Julia, how are you?" And I've not heard back, so she might well be sleeping in. I think she's had a little bit of trouble with her children being very exuberant, and that may well have worn her out. And you can imagine being stuck at home, really unable to get out, and the kids and all of that is very difficult. Anyway, let's press on, shall we? So this is the next bit to the Potteries. Cups, saucers, dishes, plates, jugs, mugs, teapots, basins. For nearly 40 years, I have been making use of them. Had I often wondered how they were made? I had not. In all those years, I had never spent 5 minutes wondering how these things were made. They might have grown on trees or been fished out of the sea for all I knew or cared. Now that I look back at this old ignorance, my pre-Potteries self, with the contempt... Now I look back at this old ignorance, this pre-Potteries self, with contempt that the fellow deserves. I have been behind the crockery scenes. I am almost one of the pottery lads. When I dine out, I often turn the plates over and see who has made them. Many of my friends, I'm sorry to say, are using foreign ware, and some of those who have bought English stuff have been fobbed off, I'm afraid, with seconds. This last is a technical joke, only meant for my colleagues in the trade. I know now how jugs acquire their handles and teapots their spouts. I have been in at the birth of giant meat plates. I can sketch you with these two hands the early life of a vase or a litter of egg cups. How do cups and saucers and plates come to have gilt lines and floral decorations and even whole pictures on them? I am now addressing the vast oafish lay public. You don't know. But I know, having actually been there when the trick was done, and those very imposing vases and mugs that must have Greek damsels and cupids on them standing out in clear relief. You may not admire them very much. I didn't myself. But how are they made? Where do the damsels and cupids come from? Scarlet with shame. And again, you have to confess your ignorance. But I know. I know. I could not make one myself, but I believe I could give a rough, perhaps a very rough, far too rough, directions on how they should be made. All this weight of knowledge comes from visiting the Potteries. I thought I should like to obtain a glimpse of the trade. There are, however, no glimpses in the pottery. You either stay out the works or you come in and take a good long look. There is nothing. They are nothing if thorough. I had arranged to visit 2 firms, very good old firms with a fine tradition dating from about the middle of the 18th century. They were chosen for me by my Staffordshire friends as being a representative of the more decorative branch of the trade. The first of the 2 works was that of Messrs. Adams. There I was given a guide, a youngish man of the foreman class, a very knowledgeable, stocky chap in a brown overall, and very pleasant and intelligent, though given at times of being aggressively sententious. What does sententious mean? He had an odd habit, though I found afterwards that it was by no means peculiar to himself, of referring to all the work people as ladies and gentlemen, in complete opposition to all those militant Democrats who now say that who now call other persons their comrades. Thus, this guide would not say the men over there are making plates, but would say those gentlemen are making plates. He would not say the women and girls are putting on the handles, but would say the ladies are putting on the handles. Even girls of 16, all sticky with printing ink or paint, and the lads of 19 smothered in clay, became ladies and gentlemen. This habit gave our inspection of this sturdy old craft a curious genteel mincing affair. Though there were nothing genteel or mincing about the guide himself, who would fix me with a sharp little eye and declare aggressively, "Now, notice these bits of tools this gentleman's using. 6pence would buy the lot, wouldn't it? Right. Just homemade bits of things, aren't they? Right. Well, they've been using things like them for 100 years, and you can't improve on them. Can't be done. We've tried, and we know. Ask this gentleman, he'll tell you. I bet you anything you like, you can't find better tools for the job than these bits of things." And I would reply in a little shamefaced fashion, inevitably on these occasions, that I'm sure that he was right. They were all pleasant and intelligent, but aggressive in this way. We would stop to see a man, or rather, we would stop to see a gentleman, at work on some process, and my guide would say, "Now you're thinking this looks easy, aren't you?" And the man himself would turn round and say, "Yes, that's right. They all think it's easy until they give it a try." And then they would both fix me with little sharp eyes, as if my blundering ignorance was trying to rob them of the fruits of their years of apprenticeship and careful craftsmanship. And I would be wondering whether to say, "Yes, it looks very easy," just to please them and give them an opening, or reply truthfully, "No, it doesn't look easy at all. Though I've no doubt that whatever that if I'd spent years doing nothing else, I could do it dexterously as you do." Actually, I always fell meekly at the first attitude that the ignoramus who thinks it's all easy, and so give them all the chance of being pugnaciously informative, will please them, and did me no real harm. I'm probably too conceited and dogmatic a person myself to make a good guide. To be at ease, I ought to be the guiding. And there was nothing shipshod about my stocky friend in the brown overall. I'd come there to see how he did it, and it was his business that day to show me. And he did. This trade has a language of its own, a smattering of which I acquired. The stuff that has to be shaped and fired is known as body. Its varying thickness is referred to as its strength. In its early liquid state it's called slip, and the separate ingredients of slip are called slop. The process of shaping the clay on the revolving disc, the time-old business of the potter's wheel, is known as throwing. If you work at the stuff inside a mould, you are, I believe, either jollying or jiggering. The potteries are filled with cunning men of their hands, who are divided into throwers and jolliers. My vote is for throwing, as we will see. North Staffordshire provides the master potters, the throwers and jolliers, and the rest of them, and it has the coal for the ovens, but it no longer provides its own slop. In other words, the original ingredients come from outside the district: china clay from Cornwall, flints from south coast, and so on. The flints are calcinated, and then they go into a smooth ground into a smooth paste. I saw a very ancient machine doing this. It's been revolving and grinding there for generations, and it was told that it had not been improved upon yet. The paste is mixed with various earths and clays, and then most of the moisture is pressed out of the mixture. There is in these works a fascinating machine called, I think, a pug, and out of this the firm clay glides out in a continuous square column to be cut into the necessary lengths. With the addition of varying amounts of water, it can be shaped by the thrower or pressed into the moulds. But the basis is still the ancient potter's wheel. There are scientists and engineers at work in these places, but the fundamentals of the craft remain unchanged. These North Staffordshire workmen and the potters of ancient Egypt share the same skill, and if they could meet and find a common language, no doubt they would have a lot to say to one another. Here, in short, you have the modern industry rooted in a traditional craft. Moreover, there is tradition at work, even among these modern employees. I watched a man performing the difficult operation of throwing large meat dishes. These are made by taking a piece of the clay which has been roughly pounded down and to the required area and thickness, and then quickly placing it on a plaster of Paris mould. The mould is revolved at various speeds, and as it goes round, the thrower rapidly and deftly adjusts the clay to it and evens out the thickness of the embryo dish. At the moment, as the movement is circular and the dish is not, this process is extremely difficult and demands a very fine trained sense of touch, which I discovered after one humiliating half-minute that I did not possess. But this man had been throwing dishes and plates all his life, and his father and grandfather before him had been throwing dishes and plates. By this time, it had become a family craft. For all I knew, they were beginning to be born with the throwing faculty, and they threw small imaginary dishes even in the cradle. What is certain, however, is that this sound element of craft in which they can do and take personal pride removes them, all of these men, from the ordinary ranks of modern workmen. They're not merely doing a job for so much a week. They are craftsmen. They are doing something that they can do better than anybody else, and they know it. They come to their work. They do not dwindle, as most people do these days, people who have to leave their personalities behind as they clock in. On the contrary, these men, and no doubt many of the women too, become more themselves, enlarge their personalities, just because, he says, stumbling to turn over the page, just because here they can use their skill and find an outlet for their zest. Nearly all of them are on piecemeal, and I have more than a suspicion that, the pottery trade being what it is today, they have to make full use of that skill and that zest in order to take home at the weekend a decent living wage. Nevertheless, I am convinced that most of these men would scorn to do a poor job, even if they were in no danger of being discovered. Their pride would not allow them to be slovenly. For this reason, they are left to themselves to get on with the job, are trusted and respected. The happy result can be read in their faces. You have to go a long way these days to find that look. Let's just pause there for a moment. How are we doing out there? The great ability was, I was watching an old episode of Hattie Wain Investigates recently, and I recognised some of the locations being filmed around West Sussex. Oh, right. That's because I've been watching my local videos. Oh, fantastic. How good is that? Charles, let's do a quiz on music from Charles Richardson. I don't know what you're on, but you really are sort of the fly in the ointment, really. We're doing a reading. That's what we're doing. That's what we're talking about. Please don't come in and upset the apple cart, or I will just kick you out. I love slipwear, says the greater Billy. Ah, yes. I love those rose ship, Richard. Those rose... I don't know what you're talking about. Good morning to all the lovely Vobsters. Hello, lovely Julia. She made it. There we go. Right, let's carry on. Yes, so these are craftsmen, real craftsmen, ladies and gentlemen. Urged on by the guide, I went through one long clay slippery room after another and saw ladies and gentlemen of all ages and sizes shaping cups, saucers, teapots and jugs, cunningly sliding on handles and spouts. One flick of a little knife through the clay and they get just the right angle for the handles to meet the curved side of the teapots and jugs, putting on transfer papers that would leave patterns on the ware, spraying, revolving vases with colour. A fine messy job this, half an hour of which, with glorious blue and scarlet paint, would take me out of any fit of depression. Or painting gilt lines of green leaves or pink roses on the superior ware, most of which, I think, would be still more superior if they did not reflect the taste of the 50s and the Great Exhibition. Some of these better firms are now beginning to make use of the services of real artists, but they still have a great deal to learn about aesthetic demands of the present decade. I didn't like to say so at the time, and I do not enjoy saying so now, for this is a poor return for the hospitality. But these firms are at their worst when they are told to spare no expense, for then they fairly riot in artiness, in dreadful elaborations of Cupid and roses. The craftsmanship behind these pieces of superware is astonishing, but unfortunately, so are the prices themselves. But I can understand the excitement there used to be in these works when Russian Grand Dukes and American millionaires gave carte blanche orders for dinner services. I wish for all their sakes these fairy tale orders still arrived every month or two. But where are the Grand Dukes? Indeed, where are the American millionaires? These firms used to make very good thing out of what seemed to me a very queer American custom, that of having what we known as service plates, which are never loaded with food, but are placed before the guests between courses to be looked at and admired, though I never remember noticing them there. Perhaps I did not know that the right kind of Americans. I'm not sure what he's getting at here. These luxury plates were usually very ornate and would be specially made here in the Potteries for each customer. Some Americans like to have a picture of their college on their plates, or in one of these rooms there are probably transfer pictures of all American colleges, which is a very solemn thought. But all this trade has declined rapidly. It may never come back. Americans, in their new austerity, may never again flaunt their service plates or eat off Staffordshire transfer of the good old campus. If all this should suggest that the products of these firms are all unpleasing, I must haste to correct the impression. Some of their ware is very charming indeed, notably the 18th century china-glazed hand-painted ware and the deep blue printed ware of the early 19th century. However, I know nothing about ceramics and the like, and even if I did, this is no place to air my knowledge. In this establishment, like most in the district, the firing is done in the old-fashioned bottle-shaped ovens. They are bigger, especially when inspected from the inside, than at first appear to be. The things to be fired are packed with saggers or seggers, round flat-bottomed containers that are built up inside the oven, in which no space is wasted. The fires, of course, are the fires, of course, are in the wall of the oven. One firing can take 20 tons of coal. There are 2 or 3 men in charge of an oven that's being fired, and these men stay on the job until it is finished. I talked to 2 who were sitting by a hot oven, occasionally getting up to peep inside one of the fires. They looked as if they'd been there for weeks, as if they lived by the side of this monstrous hot brick bottle, and had very red-rimmed appearance. Apparently it is a very highly skilled business, this firing of an oven, and the men have to be intimately acquainted with the whims of these bottles. The two I saw were smoking short pipes, and were, I fancy, philosophers. If they were, they had all the necessary warmth of climate. This is more than we had at the theatre, the only one, I think, in the district we attended that night. It looked a fine, big old theatre, and I believe it has seen some great players and some great performances in its time. It's out of luck now, and perhaps that's why an Arctic chill settled round our legs in the stalls. What we saw was a touring revue that had spent the summer in some pierhead pavilion, and no doubt in the easy atmosphere of a seaside resort where almost anything will do that might pass for good entertainment. But here it was not good enough. The theatre, simply a building without taking traditions into account, was worthy of far better dramatic material. The potters, who have a fine sense of proportion in their work, also know what tradition means and can do better with their solitary theatre than hand it over to such a cheap hotchpotch. Perhaps they were thinking so themselves, for the place had only one seat out of every 3 occupied. The audience was interesting, as audiences always are. They laughed in grand, full-blooded fashion at the low comic, who was a hard-working fellow. They were quite unresponsive to a bit of catch-penny flag-waving patriotic bunkum, proof, if any further proof were needed, of the curious old-fashioned outlook of theatrical people who were always years out of date. And then, at the end, they all filed out in silence, a silence so odd that both my friend and I instantly remarked upon it to one another. It was not the silence of deep satisfaction, of an audience that had been greatly moved and suddenly felt shy. When the curtain came down and the orchestra flung its few bars of the national anthem at us, it seemed as if the audience immediately realised that it had been wasting its time and money. Nobody laughed or raised a voice. Out we all went, as quietly as we could go, in utter silence. Freezing Hanley was waiting for us, though some of our legs had been part of that for the last hour. A late bus picked up its passengers. A few cars went rattling down the long, deserted main road. The rest was silence again. Pause at that moment. I love the Mary Rose ship. Oh, yeah, read that. Hello, lovely Julia. Good morning. Sunny Birmingham. Listen with Richard. Nigel Sadler. Yeah, I was sort of stumbling a bit on that last bit. Anthony Hardley. Stoke-on-Trent. Yes, that's it. Stoke-on-Trent. Or the 6 towns or the 5 towns, depending on the different interpretations he seems to set. Miss something or other, Suspiciators, says, no, using TikTok. What's the story about? It is about the tour of England, says Anthony Hartley. It's a book called English Journey by J.B. Priestley. He's touring through 1933 and observations, and it's just in the middle of the Big Depression. America's got the Big Depression. We've got a slight depression over here. And meanwhile, Germany is building up her forces for in 7 years' time, or 6 years' time, I suppose, the war suddenly breaks out. We declare war on Germany, but that's in the future. But it's quite a bleak time, the 1930s. Nobody was earning a lot of money. They were still reeling from the financial problems after the First World War. People were out of work, men were in short supply and slowly coming back, younger men who missed out on the war sort of taking over. There was new technology coming on stream, and J.B. Priestley, who I don't know how old he was, I guess in his 50s or something, is making this tour from different areas of Britain. And he's gone to the Potteries, an area known as the Potteries. It's fascinating that there were areas that specialised in one type of thing, like all the earthenware pots and jugs and vases and cups and plates all came from the potteries. It is fascinating that was a thing. Anyway, we carry on a little bit more. The next morning, we went to Wedge Woods. Those works are in a place that the famous original Wedgwood christened Etruria. All that remains of my memory concerning Etruria is that it was by the side of a very dirty canal. I might have remembered it more if I'd not spent so much time amusing inside the works. Once more, I had a guide with brown overalls, a pleasant but there's that word again. Sententious. What is this? Did anyone manage to look that up? Sententious, sententious manner, and had the habit of referring to all the sundry as ladies and gentlemen, which obviously they did in the previous place. They were long, long walks through sheds and rooms waiting for us both, but this time, having seen something of the previous processes, I was determined to vary the programme. But for the first hour or so I said nothing. We watched some very good throwing in one big lighted room, where everybody seemed to be busy and cheerful. Then we watched some gentlemen putting various round articles, bowls and jugs and the like, on lathes and turning them, or putting in decoration with funny little odds and end tools. Of all these articles were made of a heavier clay, which lent itself in the most accommodating fashion to these fascinating methods of treatment. To stand there and see the particles of clay fly from the sharp edge of a tool was very tantalizing. I am not, and I have never pretended to be, a man of my hands. No great craftsman was lost when I took to scribbling for a living. But there was something very tempting about these surfaces of hard, darkish clay. In some instances, these surfaces were rather rough and had to be turned on the machine to make them deliciously smooth. In other instances, the fine smoothness was there and now had to be dug into cunningly to make the necessary decoration. Never had I seen another substance that set up such an itch in the hand. All your manhood or boyhood ached to be there. The lovely stuff simply asked for trouble. This is not a feeling peculiar to me, the mere visitor. Quite obviously all the men there were in thrall too. They had been working with this stuff for years and years and had served 7-year apprenticeship too. But they were still happy about setting it around. Whirr! And there were the tiny dark cascade of clay. The tool went biting in and in until the man on the job suddenly stopped, took a pair of calipers, made a swift measurement, and found that his eye had been right and no more was necessary. Do not tell me that these fellows were not enjoying their work. If one of them had been compelled to stay in that room without laying a finger on the clay, he would have gone mad. "Can I have a shot at this?" I asked the guide, piteously. He said I could, but he would take me to a special little department where a very experienced and highly skilled man did the turning and decoration of the more important pieces. This department turned out to be a queer little 18th century cabin, which looked at first like the old curiosity shop. It was crowded with a glorious hodgepodge of plastic moulds, blueprints, vases in various stages of completion, rum little tools, clay shavings, and 101 other things. I looked at the mad jumble one sees in the pictures of the old alchemists' chambers. It looked the same. There ought to have been a stuffed alligator hanging from the roof and a few skulls about. In the far corner was an old treadle machine, probably the darling of the original 18th century Wedgwood. The treadling was worked by an elderly, comfortable-looking woman. At the other end of it, attending to the decorating of the revolving vases, was an elderly, comfortable-looking man. There was quite a Darby and Joan atmosphere about these two, though actually they were only two old colleagues. The guide explained that I wanted to try my hand at a little decoration. The craftsman was affable, though I thought I caught a sardonic gleam from his spectacles. He put a small black Bolsit vase on the machine, and then showed me how to apply it as it revolved. The various foolish little tools He put a small black Bolsit vase on the machine, and then showed me how to apply to it as it revolved the various foolish little tools that were there. He gave me a short demonstration. It looked very easy, but wisely I refrained from saying so. I took up my position. "Right, Mary," he said, and Mary treadled, and the vase went round and round. "Press harder," he said. I did, nervously, jerkily. "Not so hard," he said. I thought, and I still think, that I did the flower and leaf decoration at the top very well, and was not bad at the cutting out of the little bit at the bottom. But the middle part, in which one had to shave a small slice away at equal distances all round the vase, was not good. It didn't look good then, and it doesn't look good now. Yes, I have that very vase, which was afterwards fired for me, and now is deep and black and almost like metal here in the house, and when it first arrived the children pretended to admire it. Every time I look at it, I wish that I could try that middle bit again. Some day I will make a special journey to Wedge Woods to see if I cannot do better in the middle around the vase. Possibly, however, they will not let me in again, for they may easily have had quite enough of me that day. It was now lunch, and It was now the lunch hour, how time hurries away us craftsmen, and I joined 3 very pleasant and intelligent young men who appeared to be in complete charge of the big, complicated works. This, in itself, was a happy change, for as a rule one sees nothing but middle-aged or elderly faces around the directors' dining tables. After a lot of good talk about the Potteries and trade and America and wages and what not, I told them that they would never get me out of their works until I had done a little throwing. If I could not throw something that afternoon, I should go down to the very grave dissatisfied. So it was arranged that I should have a throw. These people may talk of jollying and jiggering, and mixing slop and pugging the slip, and designing moulds and making moulds and printing transfers and hand printing and gilding, until their voices are no more than a hoarse rattle. But they will never persuade me that the very heart and soul of the craft is not the glorious throwing, which has in its essence come down to us through the mists of antiquity. I had watched these fellows as I watched Cinquevalli, the juggler. But they are better than he ever was, for their juggling is creative. Indeed, this process looks more like the original creation itself than anything I have ever seen. It's miraculous. The thrower sits on a small high seat well above the wheel, which here is a horizontal rotating disc, driven automatically, but controlled by a foot pedal. He takes a lump of clay, wets it with water, then first centres it by letting it spin rapidly between his hands and gently increasing the pressure until it rises into a whirling column that very quickly becomes symmetrical. He can then play with it as he pleases, a downward and outward pressure, and it simply turns into a bowl. An upward pressure transforms it into a vase. If there is a more fascinating operation than this in all man's varied handiwork, I have never had the luck to see it. I want no conjuring trick more enchanting than this of spinning clay instantly flowering into bowls and jugs and vases of every known shape. Here is the supreme triumph of man's creative thumb. The combination of eagerness and docility in the spinning moistened clay was entrancing. If the far slower and the more arid work of turning machines and the little digging tools fascinated me and made me itch to be at work, what then could be said for this marvellous operation, this essence of rapid creation? I guessed, of course, that it could not possibly be as easy as it looked, that the men do not have 7 years' apprenticeship for nothing. But I didn't care how big a fool I made of myself before these grinning lads and lasses. I had to try my hand at it. And of course, I cherished the vague hope, which was perhaps less vague after lunch than before, that I would prove the exception to the rule of this craftsmanship, that I would be miraculously empowered with the potter's thumb at once. "Why, you were born with the touch, sir," they would say, startled and admiringly. And I might achieve, within a single hour, that Priestley bowl, that Priestley vase, which would open a new chapter in the history of this famous old firm. For more than 30 years now, I have never tried to do anything without cherishing this wild hope that God would let me play tennis or billiards or the violin wonderfully at first sight, allow me to display myself suddenly as a heavenly-born orator or singer. No such miracle has ever happened. Nobody has been startled by my exhibition of unsuspected skill. Yet I know I shall go on hoping this same foolish fashion right to the very end, when, the silliest old man in England, I shall be hoping to die in some new, clever, neat way. Now I put on a suit of overalls. So much wet clay had dried on them that they were stiff and thick as armour. I climbed onto the little high seat and then tried revolving the wheel. I found the foot pedal hard to regulate and very uncomfortable. They gave me a good lump of clay, and I set it whirling and tried to centre it. At first I couldn't press hard enough, and then I pressed too hard, with the result that the clay shot up into a frightening lopsided tower and wobbled desperately between my hands. It took me some time to make some kind of reasonable shot at centering. After that, I tried to make things. But my vases had a nasty trick of growing very tall and then very wide at the mouth, and then of releasing most of themselves from the bondage of the wheel altogether. Often in my excitement I would forget that my right foot was supposed to be controlling the speed, and grappling manfully with the clay, I would let my foot press down, with the inevitable result that the speed increased enormously. The clay went round too fast and could not be manipulated, and indeed could not be kept in any kind of order at all, and would reach up and try and strangle me, or would fling a long strand of itself at a couple of grinning lads 5 yards away. I decided to experiment with bowls instead of vases, for as soon as the clay was more than about 6 inches tall, it could not be controlled by me. At first, the bowl seemed much easier, but time after time something went wrong. The rims would become too thick, or there would be air bubbles in the clay, or when I tried to shape the outside towards the bottom, I would press too hard, and the whole wretched bowl would begin rising up in the air again. I was a great success as an entertainer, if not a potter, for all the other folk roared with laughter. I spent almost a whole afternoon wrestling with innumerable lumps of clay. My hands got lost in the greyish wet stuff, and it was all over my face and my hair. My foot was more or less on terms with that pedal, which developed an early cramp and soon took possession of my entire right leg. But I was determined to make something that afternoon, even if I had long ago abandoned the noble idea of vases and had shrunk to considering, even wistfully, anything short of an ashtray that would stand up at all. I managed, in the end, too, a sturdy little bowl that you could use for sugar or sweets, or as an ashtray. Not one of those inhumanly symmetrical and smoothly finished things, but a bit knobbly and rough, one of your genuine handmade articles. They promised, almost with tears in their eyes, to be kind to this little chap, and fire him and glaze him, and then pack him carefully in straw and wood, and send him on to me. He has not turned up yet. though that black ballast fellow that I decorated, in my opinion, with inferior production, has been here for some time. If Wedge Woods have lost or destroyed it in their jealous rage, or have locked it in a safe, I warn them that I shall return to the Potteries and throw again, throw like mad. I have half a mind to install a wheel here, and one more easily controlled than theirs, and have the clay sent down by the ton, so that I can tackle this vase and bowl problem again at my leisure. One thing is certain, that the guide was right when he said there was life in clay. Set it spinning, and there is far too much life in it. You feel it fluttering and straining between your hands like a captured wild thing. Oh, with little pressure of the palm, a flick of the thumbs here, to be able to make a flower in every imaginable shape. William de Morgan, after being a potter for most of his life, took to writing novels at the end of it. If I had more confidence in my thumbs, I would reverse the process. Early in this chapter, I declared that the Potteries were no place to be out of work or idle in, but were excellent for men hard at it in the local trade. You can see why now. This is an industry that is still a craft. In the cheaper branches of it, more and more may be done by machinery, but the element of craft, of work demanding personal skill and quick judgment, still remains. I never saw people in an industrial area who looked more contented during their working hours than these Staffordshire folk. And, as it is still difficult to run a pot bank on a gigantic joint stock inhuman scale, the trade has largely remained cosy and homely, and is given to using Christian names. It is chiefly made up of small family businesses in which the employer is well acquainted with all his workpeople, and it is for these reasons that serious labour troubles have been rare in the Potteries, though the folk there are sturdily independent. I smoked a pipe with one of their trade union officials, a good solid chap. "Oh, we often read you around here," he declared, "and sometimes we like to give you one on the nose." And what he told me confirmed this. They have some difficulty getting all the employers, especially the small ones, to conform to adopt a scale of wages. Cheap foreign competition, he admitted, had compelled such employers to cut their prices and with them their wages. Even when all the small allied trades are taken into account, this is, of course, not one of the major industries. England could easily recover from a total loss of its pottery trade. Even North Staffordshire could still have its coalfield. If it was simply a matter of mere numbers, there would not be much reason for devoting even a short chapter of a book such as this to the Potteries. But then, I am not writing an economic geography of this country. I am making a journey to see how my fellow countrymen live and work and play, and the Potteries seemed unique to me. They look like no other industrial region. They are unique in their remote, self-contained provincialism. They are unique in their work, an industry still a craft, and one of the oldest in the world. We ought to keep that craft here, even if it meant looking at the trademark when we buy a cup and saucer and being ready to spend a little more on them. We must have our own throwers and jolliers. Why should we subsidise other people's fun? Throwing and jollying should begin at home. I shall never look at that piece of crockery with the same eyes that I used to in my pre-ignorant pottery days. I shall feel the reverberations of every fresh blow that strikes the industry, because I know that it means that a few more deft thumbs are robbed of their clay, and that some will throw and jigger no more, and that some good folk who only ask to put their time-old skill to service will go to join the unhappy idlers who hang about the dingy little streets in the dingy little towns, which are still a city only on paper. May the orders pour in. May prodigious and unheard of quantities of slop be transformed into slip. May cups and saucers and plates and teapots rush like magic out of the clay. May the ovens never grow cold. May Stoke-on-Trent, a real city, spacious and gay, fit for the good craftsman to live in, rise high and white. And may the blanket of smoke and the sooty dolls' houses, the blackened fields, soon be nothing but a memory, a tale of old pioneers. Chapter 8 next, to Lancashire. There you go. That was the Potteries. How fascinating! I love that bit, the turning of the spinning of the clay and stuff. That was fantastic. Oh, my eyes have gone for a bit peculiar now. Stoneware. Given to moralising in a pompous and self-affected manner. Yes, I suppose he was. Thank you for all the inspiration and information about England. I moved to England 5 years ago, says Paulo Dury. And when I started following your channel, I became obsessed by the historical culture of this country. I know it is an amazing country, and as you unfold it and inspect it and look at it and stare at it and lift up stones and see the history underneath, squirming and running like ants and little miniature armadillos, which the insect's name has actually escaped me. What do you call those? Woodlice, thank you. Centurious, giving it moralise. Oh, that's the name of the word. Oh, that's it. Sententious, giving it moralising in a pompous manner. Ah, yes. Sorry, I thought you were discussing. I thought you were saying that was Priestley's way of doing it. But yes, that's what that's an interesting word. Sententious. I like it. Barry Phillips says, very influential book in that Priestley was one of the reasons the Labour Party was elected in 1945 and subsequently gave us the National Health Service, something that we are all so grateful for now. Yes, it's interesting. I was reading a thing about Winston Churchill, who had put forward the idea of this, but it never came about in his parliament. But he had devised, so the book that I read, as the National Health Service as a thing, but he didn't get it off the ground. It was indeed the Labour Party that did it. Charles Richardson is great reading. Thank you very much. Morning all to Les Jarvis. Morning, and Rusty Birthplace. Roly Polies. Yes, Roly Polies. Well, there we go. That was fun. Miss Century, deleted by. Oh, it's deleted. Well done. Marvellous. Sorry, just catching up with some of the comments. Yeah, I enjoyed that reading. So we go to Lancashire tomorrow at the same time. Chapter 8. How far are we got in now? We're just coming up to the end of 2/3 in. Fascinating book. How wonderful is that? Thank you very much for coming and joining me. It's nearly 10:30. We're 22 minutes past 10 over here in the UK. I love our history. I dug my garden yesterday and found an old Roman cigarette lighter. You found an old Roman cigarette lighter? That does sound a bit dubious, seeing as we didn't have cigarettes until whenever it was, the 18th century, was it? Fiona Hammond says, thank you, Richard. Really enjoyed it this morning. We both have a good laugh. Look forward to the next chapter. Priestley was 39. Was he 39 when he wrote the book? I wish I was as skilled a writer or at anything at 39. It is amazing. It seems to me that in the past, people's skill set developed quicker than many people of today. You know, I think people get very skillful by the time they're in their 50s. But, you know, like with Richard Jefferies, who was 38 when he died, and he'd written various things. Priestley, 39 when that was published. That is amazing. I thought that someone was being insulating, but it was a description of that word. Lancashire, the country of my birth, says TurboStream. Lovely to listen to you again, Richard. Thank you, Julia. That's very kind. Well done, Richard. Happy Easter from Charles. Happy Easter to everybody, by the way. I'll carry on reading all through the crisis as much as I can. My back is greatly improved, so I shall try and get out and do some videos as well. A little bug that rolls in a ball, a roly-poly, ballo. Fantastic. All right, that's it then for this morning. Thank you so much for tuning in again. I'll catch up with you a bit later on. I have a video to edit up shortly and put out for this afternoon. That'll probably go at about 2 o'clock, and then I shall be live this evening. I've got to record my Naked Englishman podcast, which I'm behind. I should do that, probably sitting outside in the sunshine for my patrons. And then I'll be live again at 8 o'clock in the evening, debating whether I'm doing the bread baking tonight or tomorrow. That it could be that. Thanks so much for reading so beautifully. Well, I struggled a little bit, but the bit with the energy in and the turning, that was a joy to read. He is great to read, I have to say. Reading aloud a bit of Priestley is very good for the soul. Anyway, take care. Thank you very much. See you later. Have a good one. And we'll do it all again in the morrow. Till next time. Bye for now. Bye-bye.